In the quiet town of Hyde, England, where trust in one's local doctor was implicit, a dark narrative unfolded that would forever alter the perception of medical sanctity. Dr. Harold Shipman, a name once synonymous with care and compassion, concealed a chilling secret behind his professional facade. Patients, predominantly elderly women, entrusted their lives to his medical expertise, unaware that their healer harbored lethal intentions. Over 2 decades, an alarming number of his patients met untimely deaths, each demise meticulously recorded as natural causes. Yet whispers of suspicion began to permeate the community. A local funeral director noted the unusually high number of cremation forms bearing Shipman's signature. A pattern emerged, but concrete evidence remained elusive. It wasn't until the death of Kathleen Grundy, a vibrant 81-year-old former mayoress, that the facade began to crumble. Found deceased in her home, her death certificate, signed by Shipman, cited old age as the cause. However, a suspiciously altered will, leaving her entire estate to Shipman, raised red flags for her family. An exhumation revealed lethal levels of diamorphine, the medical-grade heroin Shipman favored, confirming foul play. As investigators dug deeper, a horrifying realization dawned. Kathleen was not an isolated case. The trusted doctor had been systematically administering fatal doses to countless patients, masking murders as natural deaths. The community, once filled with trust, now grappled with betrayal and fear. How had this benevolent figure orchestrated such a prolonged killing spree? What drove a man sworn to save lives to become one of history's most prolific serial killers? The answers lie within a complex web of deceit, manipulation, and a gross abuse of medical authority. Stay with us as we unravel the disturbing tale of Dr. Harold Shipman, the healer who became an executioner. But first, consider this: how well do you know those you trust with your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth true crime stories. Now, let's dig deeper into the mind of a man who betrayed the very oath he took to protect. Dr. Harold Shipman, known to his community in Hyde, Greater Manchester as Dr. Death, was far from the nickname's grim reality, at least on the surface. He was a general practitioner with a reputation for being compassionate, attentive, and deeply committed to his patients. Families entrusted him with their loved ones, often praising his ability to provide comfort during life's most vulnerable moments. Born in 1946 in Nottingham, Shipman grew up in a modest household, later excelling in medical school at Leeds University, eventually becoming a pillar of his community. He ran a successful medical practice where patients revered him as more than just a doctor. He was a confidant and caregiver. But behind his polished facade was a calculated predator hiding in plain sight. For over 2 decades, a disturbing pattern of unexplained deaths among his patients began to emerge. Most were elderly women who trusted Dr. Shipman implicitly. The final thread that unraveled his charade came in 1998, when Kathleen Grundy, a former mayoress of Hyde, was found dead in her home. Shipman had signed her death certificate, attributing it to old age. Yet her family found an alarming discrepancy. A forged will, written in shaky handwriting, left her entire estate to Shipman. This raised suspicions that sparked a deeper investigation. What authorities uncovered would shock not just the small town of Hyde, but the entire nation. Dr. Harold Shipman, the trusted family doctor, had used his position to carry out a killing spree that claimed the lives of over 200 patients. How did he do it? Why wasn't he caught sooner? And how could someone so revered betray the very people who trusted him the most? Let's uncover the chilling story of how a healer became a killer. Harold Frederick Shipman was born on January 14, 1946, in Nottingham, England. He grew up in a working-class family, the second of 4 children. From an early age, Harold displayed a sharp intellect and a keen interest in academics, particularly in science. His mother, Vera, played a significant role in shaping his early ambitions. She held high expectations for her son, often pushing him to excel in his studies. But Harold's life took a tragic turn during his teenage years. His mother was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. As she withered away in their family home, Harold witnessed the impact of pain relief on her final days. The use of morphine brought her brief comfort amid immense suffering. It's said that this experience left a lasting impression on the young boy, potentially sowing the seeds for his later obsession with controlling life and death. Despite his personal loss, Harold was determined to succeed. In 1970, he graduated from Leeds University Medical School and began his medical career. Early on, Shipman's ambition and intelligence impressed his colleagues. He seemed to thrive in the fast-paced environment of medicine, quickly building a reputation for competence and diligence. In the late 1970s, Dr. Shipman moved to Hyde, a quiet suburban town in Greater Manchester. There, he established his own medical practice. The town's residents welcomed him warmly. He was seen as a family man, married to his wife Primrose, with whom he had 4 children. Dr. Shipman became a trusted figure in the community. Patients described him as kind, attentive, and willing to go the extra mile to ensure their health and comfort. He was so patient, one elderly resident recounted. He always made time for you, no matter how busy he was. His willingness to make house calls, often to elderly patients, endeared him further. People believed he was genuinely invested in their well-being. But not everything about Dr. Harold Shipman was as it seemed. Behind his calm demeanor and gentle bedside manner was a man who had discovered how to wield medicine as both a tool for healing and a weapon for killing. How did he transform from a caring doctor into one of the most prolific serial killers in history? The cracks in his facade began to show, but only after years of calculated deception. Harold Shipman's career as a trusted doctor spanned over 2 decades, but his reign of terror started to take shape much earlier than anyone suspected. One of his earliest victims, as far as investigators could trace, was 70-year-old Marie West. In 1978, Marie, a retired schoolteacher, was found dead in her home shortly after a routine visit from Dr. Shipman. Shipman cited heart failure as the cause of death, a reasonable conclusion given her age and medical history. Marie's family, grieving and unsuspecting, trusted the doctor's assessment and opted not to request an autopsy. This scenario repeated itself time and time again. Elderly patients under Dr. Shipman's care seemed to pass away unexpectedly, but peacefully in their homes. The causes of death varied, but the circumstances were eerily similar. Each had recently seen Shipman and many had been alone at the time of their deaths. Over the years, local funeral directors began noticing an unsettling trend. Dr. Shipman's patients were dying at an unusually high rate compared to those of other local doctors. What's more, many of these deaths required cremation, procedures that would conveniently destroy any trace of foul play. I remember thinking it was odd, the number of death certificates he signed for elderly women, one funeral director later said. But he was so respected, so trusted. Who would question him? At this point, whispers of suspicion began circulating among Hyde's tight-knit medical and professional communities. However, these murmurs rarely left private conversations. After all, who would suspect a doctor, especially one as esteemed as Harold Shipman? But then, in 1998, everything changed. Kathleen Grundy, an 81-year-old former mayoress of Hyde, was found lifeless in her home. Shipman, who had visited her earlier that day, listed old age as the cause of death and advised her family against a post-mortem examination. But there was one glaring issue. Kathleen's family discovered a new will, allegedly signed by her, leaving her entire £386,000 estate to Dr. Shipman. The handwriting was shaky, the language uncharacteristic, and the entire situation deeply suspicious. Kathleen's daughter, Angela Woodruff, a lawyer, immediately questioned its authenticity.
My mother was incredibly independent and sharp-minded. There's no way she would have made such a decision, let alone kept it from me.
Angela contacted the authorities, leading to the exhumation of her mother's body. What they discovered sent shockwaves through the community. Kathleen Grundy had lethal levels of diamorphine, a medical-grade heroin, coursing through her system. This wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act of murder. Investigators began to dig deeper into Shipman's patient records. They discovered a chilling pattern. Dozens of deaths, all under similar circumstances, and a disturbing trend in his prescriptions. Many of his patients had been prescribed or administered diamorphine shortly before their deaths. The question now wasn't whether Harold Shipman had killed, but how many lives he had taken. What was his motive? How did he evade suspicion for so long? And why did no one question his actions until it was far too late? As the web of deceit unraveled, authorities uncovered a staggering truth about Dr. Shipman's deadly practices, one that would make him one of the most prolific serial killers in history. The investigation into Harold Shipman's crimes began cautiously, but quickly snowballed into one of the largest inquiries in British criminal history. It all started with Kathleen Grundy's suspicious death and the forged will that pointed directly to Dr. Shipman. Angela Woodruff's determination and legal expertise gave investigators their first solid lead. Exhuming Kathleen's body and finding traces of diamorphine, a drug typically used to manage severe pain in terminal patients, confirmed foul play, but one victim was just the beginning. Detectives began scrutinizing the records of other patients who had died under Shipman's care. What they found was deeply troubling. An unusually high number of deaths among his elderly patients, many occurring shortly after home visits from the doctor. Shipman himself had signed most of the death certificates, often citing causes like old age or heart failure. To build a stronger case, investigators reached out to families of deceased patients. They listened as grieving relatives shared eerily similar stories, sudden deaths, little to no warning signs, and Shipman's insistence on cremation.
He told us it was natural, that there was no need for an autopsy. We trusted him.
Police also examined Shipman's prescribing habits. They discovered that he had ordered large quantities of diamorphine over the years, far more than any general practitioner would typically need. These drugs were often unaccounted for in his medical records. The evidence began to mount, but Shipman's reputation as a respected doctor posed a significant challenge. Hyde was a small town, and many residents struggled to believe that someone so trusted could commit such heinous acts. Adding to the difficulty, Shipman had carefully constructed an image of professionalism. His demeanor was calm, his explanations reasonable, and his credentials impeccable. Even in the face of mounting suspicion, he maintained his composure, dismissing any allegations as baseless. "He was a good doctor," one local resident said. "I still can't believe he would do something like this." Authorities knew they needed irrefutable proof to break through the wall of trust Shipman had built. They turned to forensic analysis, exhuming more bodies of his former patients. Autopsies revealed consistent findings, lethal doses of diamorphine. To strengthen their case, detectives also set up undercover surveillance. They tracked Shipman's movements, examined his financial records, and monitored his interactions with patients. The web of lies he had woven began to unravel. But the most chilling discovery came from Shipman's own medical records. He had kept meticulous notes, documenting his actions with an almost clinical detachment. These records provided a damning timeline of his crimes, linking him to the deaths of hundreds of patients. The investigators were on the verge of exposing a horrifying truth, one that would shock even the most seasoned detectives. How many lives had Dr. Shipman taken? And what could drive a man sworn to save lives to commit such monstrous acts? After months of painstaking investigation, police had finally gathered enough evidence to charge Harold Shipman. On September 7, 1998, he was arrested at his home and faced charges for the murders of 15 of his patients. But for investigators, the number was only the tip of the iceberg. The trial of Harold Shipman began on October 5, 1999 at Preston Crown Court. It quickly became one of the most high-profile legal proceedings in British history. The prosecution presented damning evidence, including records of diamorphine prescriptions, falsified medical records, and testimony from the families of his victims. Dr. Shipman abused his position of trust to carry out cold and calculated murders, the prosecutor declared. He chose his victims deliberately and took meticulous steps to cover his tracks. One of the most shocking revelations came from Shipman's forged will for Kathleen Grundy. The amateur nature of the forgery, coupled with the absurdity of its claims, highlighted not just his arrogance, but also his belief that no one would question his actions. The court also heard emotional victim impact statements from grieving families.
We trusted him with our mother's care, and he betrayed that trust in the worst way imaginable.
Despite the overwhelming evidence, Shipman maintained his innocence throughout the trial. He showed no remorse, no emotion, and no acknowledgement of the lives he had destroyed.
Dr. Shipman appears unfazed by the accusations. He continues to deny all charges, even in the face of irrefutable evidence.
The jury deliberated for 6 days before delivering their verdict. On January 31st, 2000, Harold Shipman was found guilty of 15 counts of murder and 1 count of forgery. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the judge recommending that he never be released.
Your actions have brought untold suffering to your victims' families. You will spend the rest of your life in prison for these heinous crimes.
For many, the trial provided a sense of closure, but questions lingered. How had Shipman managed to kill so many without arousing suspicion for so long? How many more victims were there beyond the 15 he was charged with? Subsequent inquiries suggested that the true number of his victims could be as high as 250, making him one of the most prolific serial killers in history. However, with so many of his patients cremated, the exact number may never be known. In 2004, Shipman took his own life in his prison cell, robbing the families of his victims of any further answers. His death left behind a chilling legacy and a critical question. How could someone sworn to save lives commit such monstrous acts? Harold Shipman's case is a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and blind trust. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the very systems designed to protect us. What do you think? Could the system have caught him sooner, or was he simply too cunning? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories. Even after Harold Shipman's conviction, the question that haunted everyone, from investigators to families of his victims, was why? What drove a man, seemingly devoted to healing, to become one of the most prolific serial killers in history? Psychological experts have analyzed Shipman's behavior extensively, offering chilling insights into his motives. Shipman displayed classic traits of a narcissistic personality, one psychologist explained. He sought absolute control, not just over life, but over death. His crimes may have been less about malice and more about a deep-seated need for power. Shipman often chose elderly women as his victims, individuals who were vulnerable and less likely to spark suspicion. Experts speculate that his experience watching his mother suffer and ultimately die under the effects of morphine deeply influenced his twisted actions. Some believe he saw himself as a merciful executioner, granting his patients what he viewed as a painless death. But Shipman's actions weren't entirely altruistic. His forged will for Kathleen Grundy suggests a financial motive in at least some cases. While no evidence of widespread financial exploitation was found, this isolated incident raises questions about whether greed played a part in his deadly pattern. There are also alternative theories. Could Shipman have become addicted to the act of killing itself, the way some serial killers describe a high after their crimes? Or was it the thrill of evading detection for so long, of being seen as untouchable, that fueled his actions?
Shipman operated within a perfect storm of opportunity. His role as a trusted doctor allowed him access to victims, the means to kill them, and the authority to cover his tracks.
Perhaps the most disturbing question is, could he have been stopped earlier? Investigators revealed that Shipman's behavior had raised suspicions even before Kathleen Grundy's death. Complaints had been lodged about his prescribing habits as early as the 1970s, but they were dismissed or poorly investigated. Was this a case of a system failing to connect the dots, Or was Shipman simply too calculating and manipulative for anyone to catch him in time? As disturbing as Shipman's story is, it also serves as a grim lesson. It prompted widespread reforms in medical oversight in the UK, ensuring that doctors could no longer act with such impunity. But for the families of his victims, those changes came far too late. What do you think drove Dr. Harold Shipman to commit these unspeakable crimes? Was he a man corrupted by power, a narcissist seeking control, or something even darker? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you found this story intriguing, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more chilling true crime stories. Thank you for watching, and remember, every story has a lesson, and every voice has the power to make a difference. Until next time, stay safe.